My mother's introduction to my father occurred when she was still under the age of 18. He was 4 years her senior, and their connection blossomed into love. As is often the case in such situations, they found themselves expecting a child. However, they chose to wait until my mother reached the age of 18 before exchanging vows. It was during their wedding ceremony that she was 3 months pregnant. Faced with the desire for independence, they opted to rent a room in a communal apartment. Consequently, I entered the world before my mother even turned 19. My mother's educational background was limited to secondary school, as she had married immediately after completing high school. Meanwhile, my father had already graduated from the Polytechnic Institute and was employed as a foreman in the machine shop's preparations area at a factory. While my mother was on maternity leave, my father supported the family financially and provided immense assistance in raising me. He would take over at night, granting my mother respite from the demands of a perpetually crying infant. He diligently washed and ironed diapers, and he rushed to procure medicine whenever I fell ill. Essentially, he fulfilled the responsibilities of a loving husband and father. Once my mother completed her maternity leave, she embarked on her journey through medical school, specializing in medicine. During this time, I was entrusted to the care of my grandmother, my maternal figure. Since the medical school was located in another city, I rarely had the opportunity to see my mother, except during her occasional visits home. Each of her returns was an extraordinary occasion for me. I fondly recall the 3 of us strolling together and attending movies. When my mother was present, I was allowed to stay up late watching television. Nevertheless, the happiness of her arrival was tinged with the knowledge that her stay would be brief, and she would soon depart for her educational pursuits in another town. Consequently, the following days became bleak and filled with anticipation for her return. Throughout this period, my father provided unwavering support. He did everything within his power to ensure my well-being. He would take me to his place on weekends, teaching me how to ski and skate. Additionally, he accompanied me on my first day of school, symbolizing his dedication as a father. I have vivid memories of the times when I accompanied my father to meet my mother during her vacations. It was always a late-night affair, with the train arriving and a 3-kilometer journey to the station. Dad would hoist me up onto his shoulders, and together we would traverse the dimly lit road for what seemed like an eternity. The comfort of his shoulders was so reassuring that I would sometimes doze off during our walks. During my second grade years, my mother completed her education and served for 6 years before returning home to pursue her internship. She was assigned to our city hospital. Fortunately, by then, my father had been granted a 2-room apartment through his work, ensuring an uninterrupted and blissful family life for us. It must be noted that my mother was a strikingly beautiful woman in her youth. Her slender figure, blonde hair, and piercing blue eyes captivated everyone who laid eyes on her. It was no surprise that my father was smitten from their very first encounter. As the years passed, her beauty not only remained intact, but flourished and radiated with newfound brilliance. Even after reaching her 40s, my mother would often be mistaken for a young woman. Whenever we strolled together down the street, strangers would assume we were a couple deeply in love, rather than recognizing our bond as mother and son. After completing high school, I enrolled in an aviation institute to pursue my passion for flying. By the time I turned 23, I had already obtained my pilot's license. Fortunately, I landed a job with a domestic airline and spent 6 months gaining valuable experience. Soon after, an exciting opportunity arose, and I was sent to South Africa to work as a co-pilot on the Embraer aircraft. Our responsibilities involved operating charter flights throughout Africa, with occasional trips to Paris, London, and Washington. The entire crew, including 3 stewardesses, were Russians like myself. We formed a close-knit team, supporting each other during our time abroad. However, after a year of dedicated work, the first pilot had to return home due to family reasons. This created an opening for me, and I eagerly stepped up to assume the role. Although I went home a couple of times during this period, I always cherished the warm welcome at the airport from my father and a stunningly beautiful young woman, my mother. As my time overseas neared its end, I wanted to express my gratitude to my parents for their unwavering support. I carefully selected gifts for them: a set of exquisite French cosmetics for my mother, and a magnificent collection of collectible tin soldiers for my father. He had a fondness for tinkering with these soldiers, meticulously creating historically accurate dioramas of battles in his spare time. Finally, the day arrived when our plane landed and taxied to the terminal. Taking my time to prepare myself, I allowed the eager passengers to disembark first. I expressed my gratitude to the stewardess and retrieved my bag before making my way through passport control. After collecting my luggage, I began scanning the crowd of people eagerly waiting to greet their loved ones, searching for the familiar faces of my parents. Initially, it appeared that they might have been delayed, but I remained unperturbed and decided to head towards the cab rank, thankful that arranging transportation was much simpler nowadays. As I stepped out of the airport building and headed towards the parking lot, a familiar voice called out to me, interrupting my thoughts and drawing my attention. I glanced over and caught sight of my mom stepping out of the luxurious car that had pulled up, waving at me. My mind raced with disbelief. Had they won the lottery? How else could they afford such a car? My mom looked absolutely radiant, adorned in a beautifully styled hairdo, a cream coat, a light silk scarf, and high-heeled shoes. It was as if luck had smiled upon her, granting her this newfound luxury. "Mom, you're alone. Where's Dad? Is he sick, by any chance?" I asked, puzzled by his absence. "Get in the car, Yura. So much has happened. We'll talk on the way," she replied, her tone filled with a mix of excitement and secrecy. I settled into the back seat beside my mom, while the driver and a young man occupied the front. As soon as I closed the door, the young man turned to my mother, his curiosity evident. "Where are we headed, Elena Sergeyevna?" he inquired. "Home, Misha," Mom responded, her voice tinged with a hint of hostility. She glanced at me, offering a reassuring smile. "Yura, it's been 6 months since I left Italy. I now live with the man I love," she revealed, her words brimming with both apprehension and affection. "I didn't want to burden you while you were working, so I kept it a secret. My current husband's name is Sergey. He is my first and only love. Fate may have separated us once, but 2 years ago, we were reunited, unable to part ways ever again." As I observed her, it was evident that she was consumed by worry. Her face had a flushed complexion, and her eyes sparkled with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Initially, I failed to grasp the significance when she addressed my father as Vitaly. However, there was more to it than that. My mother dropped a bombshell, confessing that Vitaly was not my biological father. In truth, my real father was Sergey, her husband. Circumstances forced Sergey to leave her when she became pregnant, succumbing to pressure from her parents. Consequently, my mother had no choice but to marry Vitaly, providing me with some semblance of a father figure. However, throughout all those years, her heart belonged to Sergey. Though my mother continued speaking, her words became inaudible to my ears. My heartbeat pounded in my throat, and a persistent ringing filled my ears. Curiosity took hold, and I inquired about the whereabouts of my supposed father, Vitaly. Nervously, my mother shrugged her shoulders, suggesting that he was likely at home in our old apartment. "He's engrossed in playing soldiers, lost in his own world." I could discern the disdain in her voice. "Where are we headed now?" I questioned, seeking clarity. "Home, my son. We reside in a countryside cottage community. Our abode is a 3-story house. Sergey Dmitrievich, or Seryosa, as we affectionately call him, is your true father, a prominent businessman. We have prepared a room for you on the 2nd floor. You must see it for yourself." My mother beamed and bestowed a bird-like kiss on my cheek, inadvertently leaving behind a trace of her lipstick. We arrived at a grand 3-story house, nestled amidst a lush landscape of trees and manicured lawns. Standing at the doorway was a man who exuded an air of authority despite his advancing age. It dawned on me that this man was Seriosa. As though she were a dragonfly, Mother swiftly exited the car and planted a kiss on his lips. "Seriosa, this is Yura, your son," she exclaimed, embracing Sergei and urging him towards me. "Well, hello, son." Sergei approached me, extending his hand. "Hello," I replied, noticing the limp and clammy nature of his handshake. "Come inside, it's your home." He feigned a smile, gesturing me forward. I turned to my mother. "I have some errands to run. I need to visit the airline office to inform them of my arrival," I said, retrieving a box of cosmetics from my bag. "This is for you, Mom." "Oh, thank you," she exclaimed, shaking her lustrous hair. "How thoughtful, my dear." I glanced at my mother, fully aware that she no longer needed this makeup. Her Seriosa would buy her an entire perfume store if necessary. However, the rules of etiquette had to be upheld. "Stay for breakfast, then you can go," my mom said, grabbing my arm. "Wash your face and rest from the journey." "Come on, business comes first," I insisted. "Lena, a man should take care of things first," Sergei chimed in with a smile. "Let him go, and we'll wait. Take my car, the driver will accompany you, and wait as long as needed." "I'd rather take a taxi. Don't worry," I replied, kissing my mother goodbye. I walked out of the gate and dialed the cab's number. It wasn't until I sat in the cab that the full weight of the situation hit me. My mother had lived with my father for 27 years. No arguments, no scandals, always steady. I had always believed they loved each other. Yet, the moment Sergei appeared, my mother didn't hesitate to leave my father and rush into his arms for her own happiness. And now, she was dragging me along. What about my old father? After all those years spent raising someone else's child, he was now free. My mother had made her decision, and I was forced to dive headlong into the embrace of my new father. A father isn't the one who conceives, but the one who raises. I had heard that cliche more times than I could count. Yet it seemed far from true, or rather, not true at all. I couldn't help but imagine how my father must have felt when the woman he loved left him for another man. And to make matters worse, she even announced that I wasn't his son either. I headed towards my father's old apartment, indifferent to the fact of whether he was my biological father or not. My sole purpose was to reunite with the man I had always cherished as my dad. Unlocking the door with my key, I stepped inside the silent apartment. Tossing my bag onto the couch, I observed that nothing had changed. Everything remained in its rightful place, as if time had frozen in my childhood. I scanned the rooms, searching for my father, but he was nowhere to be found. Perhaps he had gone out to run errands or to his job. As the front door creaked open, I turned my gaze to find my neighbor standing in the doorway. "Welcome home, Yurashka. Your daddy is in the hospital. He had a heart attack. The ambulance took him away the day before yesterday," my neighbor informed me. Knowing that the hospital was just 2 blocks away from our house, I made my way there on foot. Upon reaching the hospital, I discovered my father in the general ward, surrounded by 7 other patients. On my way, I had purchased some fruit, kefir, and juice packets. "Hi, Daddy." I greeted him in an intentionally cheerful tone. "Instead of meeting your son, you're hiding out in hospitals." My father turned his head, his eyes widening in surprise. "Hello, Yura. Welcome home," he responded. "You see, I've fallen apart. I'm sorry I couldn't come to meet you." "It's all right, Dad. I understand. I'll manage," I reassured him. "I'm here for the long haul. I've started working for a domestic airline now, so we'll have more time together. I brought something for you. You'll see it when we get home." "When do they plan to discharge you?" "I don't know, Yura. They haven't given me any updates yet. It seems like we'll have to spend at least a couple of weeks here," my father replied, grinning weakly before succumbing to a coughing fit. I noticed that he addressed me by my name instead of his usual son. Ah, yes, Mama's work. Get well, Dad. When you're discharged, we'll go buy a cottage. Remember how you always wanted a house in the countryside? Dad remained silent and looked away. I sat with my father for a while longer, attempting to engage him in conversation about random topics. Eventually, I bid him farewell and went off to find the attending physician. The doctor reassured me, explaining that my father was experiencing nervous overstrain, but with proper care, everything could be resolved. As I left the hospital, an idea started forming in my mind. I knew exactly what I had to do. I remembered that my classmate Igor worked at the Bureau of Forensic Medicine, so I decided to give him a call and set up a meeting. Just as my mother called, I deliberately ended the call. Family meetings could wait. I didn't have time for them at the moment. Igor, I want to conduct a paternity test. I began as I spoke with my classmate. But here's the surprising part. I already know the result. After briefly explaining the situation to Igor, I continued, I need a certificate or some form of documentation to prove that this man is my biological father. Yura, this is official forgery, Igor responded, nervously twirling a box of matches in his hands. Don't worry, I reassured him. Only my father will see it. Please, just help me out. Igor rose from his seat, signaling his intent to speak. Listen carefully, he began. Retrieve the biomaterial for me. It would be preferable if it's my father's hair. Head to the lab yourself, and the girls there will take samples from you. Let's meet at 4 o'clock today. I'll provide you with an answer by tomorrow night. For the sake of our friendship, let's handle this swiftly. Igor locked eyes with me. I'll give you 2 reports, one genuine and one fake. You can decide what to do with them. Leaving the office, I dialed my mother's number. I patiently listened to her lamentations before explaining that I would spend the night in our old apartment and call her tomorrow. I had a lot to accomplish today. As expected, the following day, I arrived at my classmate's location at the appointed time. Only one document rested on Igor's desk, bearing an impressive stamp at the very bottom. I don't understand. Did something go wrong? I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. On the contrary, everything went well. Igor replied, passing the report to me. Vitaly Ivanovich Kozlov is almost certainly the biological father of Yuri Vitalievich Kozlov. The news hit me like a sudden wave, causing my legs to weaken. What does this mean? I exclaimed, desperately seeking clarification. It means that your father is undeniably your father in every aspect, Igor replied with a mocking laugh. So, take your doubts and leave. Half an hour later, I found myself in the hospital room with my father. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? I asked, gently readjusting the blanket that had slipped off. Thank you, Yura. I'm getting better, my dad responded, avoiding eye contact. Dad, why Yura instead of son? Has something changed between us, or have your feelings for me diminished? I inquired, hoping for an honest answer. Didn't your mom tell you anything? He questioned in return. She did. I know all about her new husband and her supposed non-son, I replied, grinning mischievously. Can you still read without your glasses? I handed my father the test results. He took his time reading them, his hands trembling visibly. Then he looked up at me, and I noticed a single tear rolling down his cheek. Well, shall we buy the daksha? I suggested, a warm smile spreading across my face. I chose to stay with my father, refraining from explaining much to my mother or holding any resentment towards her. It didn't seem worthwhile to delve into those matters. Initially, she attempted to persuade me to move in with her and her new husband, but eventually, she grew calmer. I kept the DNA test a secret, allowing her to believe that my father, Sergei Dmitrievich, was indeed her biological husband. Time went by, and I finally tied the knot with a wonderful woman who happened to work as a stewardess in my crew. A year later, we were blessed with a son whom we named Vitaly, after my late father. Throughout this period, my interactions with my mother were minimal. and I adamantly forbade her from visiting our home. My father, on the other hand, never remarried, though I introduced him to various women from time to time. Then, the inevitable hour arrived when my father passed away. As he had requested, I laid him to rest beside his parents. A year later, my mother's husband, Sergei Dmitrievich, also departed from this world. My mother continued residing in the cottage, relinquishing the management of her husband's business affairs to a manager while she refrained from seeking employment. One day, succumbing to my wife's pleas, I finally decided to visit my mother with my family. As we arrived, we were greeted by a well-groomed, beautiful woman. She embraced both me and my wife with kisses, but suddenly froze, as if turned to stone. A deathly pallor spread across her face as she laid eyes on Vitalik, her grandson. It was as if her first husband stood before her, only much younger, resembling the man she had fallen in love with during those distant years when she was a young girl about to embark on marriage. In that moment, she comprehended everything. "Oh God, what have I done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What have I done?"